Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. Thank you for downloading. And thank you for subscribing to the latest edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. I am your boy, 12 Kyle. Man, check this out. Welcome to episode 500. If I had air horns, I'd sound them off right now, but I don't have any damn air horns. Thank you for tuning in again. This is episode 500. Um, I just wanted to get on here and talk about reaching the milestone of 500 episodes. And it truly is a milestone. And before I even get started, let me thank each and every one of you who are listening, who are watching on YouTube. Thank you for watching, for streaming, downloading, however you get this podcast. I really appreciate it because you could have been anywhere else in the world, and you're here with me, and I appreciate that. Shout out to Hove. Um, but seriously, no, I really do appreciate it because one, it is very difficult to get to 500 episodes. Hell, to be honest, it's hard to get to 10 episodes. Most podcasts don't get that far. Um, and when you think about the fact that I think at the start of 2023, it was estimated that there were over 6 million podcasts out there. And so if you got 6 million podcasts on one hand, and then you got the fact that most podcasts that get started don't last past 10 episodes, to reach 500 is a true milestone. And again, I could not do it without you, the listener. So I really appreciate it. As I mentioned in a previous um, podcast from a couple of weeks ago, it was called "I Gotta Say What Up," where I thanked every contributor, everybody that's come on and hosted an episode, at least one episode on this podcast, and I thank them as well because they are a part of this community that made the 12 Kyle podcast what it is. Um, so how did I get here? That's a great question. As many of you know, or maybe you don't know, I actually had an internet radio show. It was called the 12 Radio Show, and I did that for 5 years from 2010 to 2015. In 2015, I decided to move it to, I decided to move the podcast, excuse me, the radio show to a pre-recorded podcast. And I thought about it and give it some thought, talked to a couple of my boys and stuff. And but I was kind of conflicted because when the radio show ended, and it was a 2 hour radio show live on Blog Talk Radio, when it ended, I chose to end it. But I was kind of like in my head a little bit because I was like, okay, well, if you're gonna do this, you got to do it your way. And I think for a while, um, not all, but some of the episodes, I think with the 12 radio show, I think I gave people some episodes that they wanted to hear and not necessarily episodes that I felt like I wanted to do per se. I mean, obviously I wanted to do them, but you get what I'm saying? Like you're giving somebody something that you think that they want as opposed to just saying, you know what, here it is right here. And, I know just the example, like I know at that particular time, particularly as interactive as my podcast was, excuse me, as the radio show was, if I did a relationship topic, you know, a gazillion people would listen and they'd be interactive on Facebook and Twitter. If I did a topic about, uh, I don't know, the symphony, breaking down the lyrics of the symphony, not as many people are going to listen. And I think what I found is that, I told myself once I started this podcast, I was going to have to do what it was that I wanted to do. To hell with how many people listen, no matter if you had one person listening or if you had 15 million people listening. And I said I was going to conduct a podcast just as if 15 million people were listening. And for all I know, 15 million people might be listening. I don't know, because when you put the podcast out, you have no idea or any control as to who listens or how they listen. And just before a couple of days before I started the podcast, I was watching Purple Rain, which is one of my favorite movies. And in watching Purple Rain, there's a scene where Billy, the club owner, is getting into an argument with Prince. And it's a couple of things that Billy said that really kind of stuck out to me. Um, for those of you who didn't see the movie, I'll let you listen to it because it's very, very good.
Stage is no place for your personal shit, man. That's life, man. Life my ass, motherfucker. This is a business, and you ain't too far gone to see that yet. I told you before, you're not packing them like you used to. Nobody digs your music but yourself. Fuck off! Yeah, okay. Just like your old man. Yeah, you got it. Tell me I'm wrong. You're not blind. Look around you. No one's digging you. Oh, buddy. What a fucking waste. But, like father, like son. Lay off that. Let me give you some good advice, Junior. Your music makes sense to no one but yourself.
And that was the thing that really, really stood out to me was Billy said, nobody digs it but you. And that kept ringing in my head like nobody's going to dig this podcast but you. And I'll be honest, maybe a couple of days before I launched the podcast, that was in my head. And then I thought about it. I said, you know what? Who gives a shit? Like, why should I care if nobody else likes it but me? It's called the 12 Kyle podcast. It's not called the 12 Reggie podcast. It's not called the 12 Vernon podcast. It's not called the 12 Willie podcast. It's the 12 Kyle podcast. It's named after somebody named 12 Kyle. It's named after somebody whose, real name is Kyle. So why should I give them, or why should I care about what people think or don't think about the podcast? And so after hearing that playing in my head, that scene really kind of put the battery in my back. Like, you shouldn't worry about what people think. And from that point on, I made it a point to really just do the type of shows that I wanted to do, talk about the kind of topics that I wanted to talk about, and to be honest, just go from there. Because at the end of the day, satisfied with whatever it is that you put out to the masses. And once I heard that, I was out of here. And again, that's when the podcast started, and that was 2015, and it just took off from there. And it's been such a great ride ever since then. I mean, like, the podcast is really something that obviously that reflects me and reflects my personality and reflects my thoughts and reflects, everything about me and what I like, what I don't like, my thought process, and just generally who I am as a person. And I think once I got settled in on that, I didn't look back. And I think that's how I got to 500 episodes, because I made the conscious effort to give the people me, authentically me, uncensored, unfiltered, unbothered me. And I don't think people could understand that. And at the end of the day, you just really want people to feel you and vibe with it. And you don't really worry about whether or not they understand it or not, because it's you. Sometimes you aren't meant to be understood. And I always go back to something one of my homies said about me when we were in like 8th grade. I remember this girl, she was liking me, right? And it was either 8th or 9th grade. And she asked one of my boys, she was like, well, how do I get closer to Kyle? Because I'm trying to like get him to notice certain things, and I'm not really getting much from him. And he just told her straight up. He said, he's going to give you a little bit, and you have to figure out the rest. And he's going to present to you what he wants to present to you, and you have to figure out the rest. And that was like one of the dopest things I heard somebody say about me at such a young age, because I was in like 8th or 9th grade. And that was true. I was going to give you a little bit, and I'd have to let you figure out the rest. But yeah, the podcast, again, it was named after me because it's authentically me. One of the things that also stood out to me is I came across a quote, and this quote is actually pinned on the on a tweet from my brother Baylor. Shout out to BTG, Baylor the Great, Baylor for President is the podcast. He also has Open Run with BTG. But on Baylor's, if you go to his Twitter handle, the top tweet is pinned, and his Twitter handle is @Baylorism, and the tweet says, "Podcasting can and will expose your true personality." Ain't that the damn truth? And that always stuck with me because it does. It will expose your true personality. So there's hundreds, maybe thousands of people that listen to this podcast that know me. They may not know me personally. They may not know much about me outside of this podcast, but through this podcast, I've given them me. And so they know my true personality. And sometimes you can give people a part of you, or at least you try to paint a picture that you want them to see. And that picture may or may not be what you think it is, because you're the one painting the picture. It's all about the interpretation of the people that is looking at the picture. So I thought that was very key, and that's very apropos about this podcast. Maybe about a year or so ago, my niece Taylor, who was in college at the time, she was a communications major. She hit me up. She said, "Uncle Kyle, I want to interview you for my for some class or something." And I was like, "Okay, cool, Tay." I said, "Let me know, whenever you want to do it." So she called me and we talked, and she's asking me questions about the podcast. And like one of the first questions she asked me, she said, "Well, Uncle Kyle, why do you have this podcast?" And I'll be honest, it kind of stumped me for a second. Because I wasn't really sure. I knew what to say, but I didn't really know how to answer it. And then I just kind of reminded her that, she's very fortunate in the fact that all four of her grandparents are still alive. Her mom's mother and father, and her dad's mother and father. Her dad is my brother Damon. So that would be my mom and my dad. And the thing that I tried to explain to her was that I lost my grandparents at a very young age. My mother's father, my grandfather, he passed away when I was like 2. And my grandmother, who was the sweetest lady to ever walk the face of the earth, she passed away when I was like 6. So I have memories of her, no memories of my grandfather because I'm so young. But I'm very big on history, and I'm big on my family's history. And my family, I could trace my family's history all the way back to slavery. And I think one of the things that would be dope was I would like to know what they thought, not just about themselves, but about the world and their situations, and from sharecropping to the Jim Crow era, being a black man or black woman raising a black family in the South, in South Carolina. So what I tried to explain to Taylor was, if these mediums stick around, the goal for me would be to create something that not just my kids, but my grandkids, my great grandkids, kids, family members that will be able to listen to something that I created and know my thoughts on many, many years after I'm gone. Now, the plan for me is to stick around for as long as I can, but the reality is that no, I ain't gonna be here another 150 years, maybe another 100, but who knows? But yeah, I wanted to create something where I documented myself, my time, and maybe somebody coming behind me, an ancestor, a relative, can get some enjoyment from it. The one thing I will say about this podcast is it's unequivocally dope. It is the best podcast that you'll hear. And I don't say that holding my tongue either. I think this is some dope shit. And I remember my man D Murph, I went down to Houston and we went out, and Murph said, man, what do you want to do with this podcast? And I said, man, I just want to make dope shit every time somebody pushes play. That's it. I don't want nothing else. I don't want to be involved in some podcast network. I don't want to be on TV. I don't want to have, be like the Joe Budden show. I want none of that. I mean, yeah, if Spotify wants to cut a check, okay, cool. But even in that, I would be very leery because there's something that comes along with that check. There's some conformity that you have to have. And so I don't need the suits, quote unquote, the suits telling me, well, no, you can't have Eclectic on this episode. We got to talk about, what happened on The Housewives, or, we got to talk about what happened on the Shade Room that was reported yesterday. No, I'm not doing it. I'm just not. And I'm not going to conform to that. I want to conform to that. I want this podcast to be what it's been. Me. I don't want it to be anything else. I'm cool on that. I make a few dollars at my job, so I'm not hurting for money. But yeah, the podcast is dope because I'm dope. And my thing is just to keep giving you dope content every single time you press play. I chose from the start not to talk about current events. And I still don't. And I have plenty of material. I have a lot of material. I'll be honest. When I sat down earlier this calendar year, I knew I was going to hit 500 just based on, I wrote a list of all the stuff that I wanted to talk about. And if I'll be honest with you guys, I haven't even scratched the surface on the topics that I want to cover. And so there's a whole lot of meat on the bone, and we're going to get to it. And I'm going to do it my way like I always have. But yeah, I always believed in, just giving people something to think about. I want you to take something from every episode. And I understand too that the thing that I didn't realize with the 12 radio show that I realized here is that every episode isn't for everybody to listen to. Let me say that again. Every episode isn't for everybody to listen to. But for those who listen, they can get something. I can't tell you how many times people will listen to an episode and say, oh man, I never knew this about this particular album, or I didn't know about this, or I like how you shared this. And for me, that's currency. I don't think you can put a price tag on that. The props, if you will. I live off the props. I don't live for the props, but I appreciate the props. And one thing about this podcast, and I've said it before and I'll say it again, like, there's no competition. Like, I'm not in competition with anybody. Never have, never will be. Because I feel like I got dope. And when you got dope, I mean, when you got pure dope, you ain't compete with nobody because the fiend's going to come and get the dope. That's it. Why would they go anywhere else when you're serving it to them consistently? Shout out to Franklin Saint. But yeah, it's a dope podcast. And, you're not going to get anything shorter than that. It's going to always be authentically me, and it's going to always be dope. And it's something that, I can definitely say that I'm proud of, and I'm proud of each episode. And a lot of times I'll go back. I mean, I'll listen to every episode, but sometimes I'll just pick an episode. If I don't have anything to listen to for a day, I'll pick an episode and just listen to it. I'm like, oh, I said that shit? Oh, wow. And I'm somewhat amazed by, some of the things that I've said. Not that I said anything that is mind-blowing that just takes you out of here, but I mean, I put together some good shit. I want to read something that I just came across on the website Good Pods, and I don't know who wrote this. It might have been King Germ from Pod and Saved Our Marriage. I don't know. It said, the headline reads, "What is the 12 Kyle podcast about? Immerse yourself in the world of the 12 Kyle podcast, a captivating auditory journey that boasts a blend of sports, music, pop culture, and life experiences. Hosted by Kyle, an an avant-garde voice in the podcasting industry. No, Germ didn't write this. The show weaves narratives around the day-to-day affairs that shape our lives. Today's society, reflected in a mirror, the podcast explores the tunes that make us groove, the game-winning goals, and the societal imprints that create a unified thread of a human experience. Are you drawn to enlightening and relatable articulations? This is the podcast for you. And again, that was from the site goodpods.com. And they went on to say, yes, another question. Who should listen to the 12 Kyle podcast? The 12 Kyle podcast is specifically crafted for the intellectually curious and culturally conscious demographics. Now, that's true. It doesn't matter if you're a sports enthusiast, a music aficionado, or a fervent follower of pop culture. This podcast has something for you. Do you yearn for fresh takes on everyday topics? Is dissecting and gaining insights into life experience your cup of tea? If yes, the 12 Kyle podcast should undoubtedly find space in your digital device. Whether you're on your daily commute or enjoying a calm evening, the 12 Kyle podcast awaits eagerly to enlighten and entertain you on goodpods.com. Thank you, goodpods.com. This just came to my attention like 2 days ago. It popped up in an email and I thought it was dope. I don't know. Again, I don't know who wrote it. Thank you. I appreciate it. Let me share with you this other tweet that I got earlier this year. Now, this is from someone that I know. The tweet says, catching up today. The tweet was at me. It's sent to me. You've been having some great shows lately. I mean, they're all good, but sometimes you can tell when the rhythm is on point. And that tweet was from my homegirl, Maya, from the We Did That Shit podcast. Shout out to Maya. I appreciate it. She sent that tweet back in March, I think. Was this March? Yeah, I think it was back in March. But I saved the tweet because, like, what Maya said was really how I was feeling. Like, I really felt like this podcast has been in a certain rhythm for a while now. I mean, I would equate it to like in basketball being in the zone. And it's been good, man. I have no complaints. I really feel like I've been in that pocket and I want to continue doing what I've been doing. But yeah, it's been a hell of a ride. And again, I want to thank you all for chopping it up and coming and visiting and supporting this podcast because it's not easy to do. I definitely have to thank, as always, my family for allowing me to carve out time because it's not easy. My wife and I have 4 kids, and we have family time. We have to spend time together as a husband and wife. I have friends, many of who I've had on this podcast and will continue to have on the podcast, and that's been a way that we've been able to laugh and communicate. But it's just been a lot of fun, and it's been dope, and I want to keep it going, and I will keep it going. As far as I know, I am signed. Is the deal done? As far as I know, the deal is done. We're contractually obligated through next year, so we've committed next year. So this thing gonna keep on moving. Before I get out of here, I want to read something to you that I came across on Twitter. I don't know where this came from. Somebody retweeted it into my timeline. The tweet came from somebody named Imahora. And the tweet reads as follows. Document your life very well. Write down your feelings. Take pictures of the things that moved you. Archive yourself. Let them know that you were here, that you existed, that you lived despite it all. Close quote. That was perfect. I think that sums up what I've tried to do with this podcast and what I will continue to do with this podcast. And I appreciate you for listening. That's going to do it for me. Thank you for checking out this episode of the 12 Kyle podcast, the 500th episode of the 12 Kyle podcast. Be sure to download, subscribe, share with your friends, share with your mom and them, everybody. I forgot to mention the podcast is now on TikTok. We have our own TikTok page, 12 Kyle podcast on TikTok. If you feel so inclined, if you want to send us some money, just for hitting 500 episodes, hit us up on Cash App, $TWELVEKYLE. Like I said, thanks again. It's been 500 episodes. I'm going to give you maybe 500 more, but I'm going to keep putting out dope shit because dope people make dope shit. And I'm dope. And dope people listen to dope shit because you're dope, because you're here. And I appreciate it. Again, that's going to do it for me. I am your boy, 12 Kyle. I'll catch you guys next time. 5 G's.